I'm going to use a very simple composition for this. I'm just going to import a JPEG and bring it into my 3D composition, drag it down there, and I'll just scale it down for the moment. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show different camera angles using a couple of different cameras, and then I'm going to cut from camera to camera to camera. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create movement on a camera so that it appears to be tracking across a shot. Now, in order to add a camera, just as you added a null object, control click or right click on the layers and go new camera. Now, I wouldn't change anything here just yet, just give it a name. I'm going to use the kind of analogy of real camera angles here, and I'm going to have a wide shot. So I'm going to call this camera wide. Right, now this is telling me camera and lights do not affect 2D layers. Select a layer and choose layer 3D layer from the menu. This is basically telling me that I have no 3D layers here, so even if I add a camera, nothing's going to happen. So I'll turn my JPEG layer into a 3D layer, so now the camera can interact with it. Now, when you create a camera, the view that you're looking at can be the active camera, or it can be any one of your orthogonal views. Your orthogonal views are your left, right, top, bottom, front or back. If you're using your camera, then it's a good idea to keep the active camera view open and one other panel view with your orthogonals. Now, the way that you change them is to select the side or the view and then change it from the drop down menu here. So at the moment I'm using top. I could change that to left or right or bottom. I'm going to leave it on top for the moment. But when I select the camera, you'll see the camera's body, you'll see the point of interest, and the point of interest is just the direction in which the camera is facing. So this tells you exactly where the center of the shot is going to be, wherever this little dot is. And you can pick that up and you can move it around to change the angle at which the camera is looking, or you can pick up the camera and move the camera around, leaving the point of interest where it is. So these will give you different visible results. So if I change the point of interest, if you look on the right hand side, the active camera is showing me what the camera is currently seeing. And if I change the point of interest, it'll change the direction, should change the direction that the camera is looking. Didn't set that to 3D. Okay, I'll set that back a few places. Now, I must have deselected that again. I thought I had set it to 3D, so I click on the 3D checkbox here to make sure that it can actually interact. Now, this time I'll do it again. If you look at the view on the right, I'm changing the point of interest to the left, and you'll see that the camera is panning. So this is the way that you would make a camera pan using the orthogonal view. Now, another way that you can move the camera is by moving the camera but leaving the point of interest where it is, and this will give you a kind of a tracking or an orbiting shot. So now the point of interest is staying where it is, but the camera is rotating around it. So these are two very different kinds of shots. If I wanted to do something like a dolly shot or a trucking shot, if I want to truck forward or truck towards that JPEG, I can just grab the Z-axis from the top view and push it in, and you'll see that it gets closer. Pull it back, gets further away. I can pull it along its x-axis and it will crab left and right, and finally I can lift it up or down by just grabbing the y-axis arrow there. So this is the way that you can use orthogonal views to pan, tilt, orbit, truck, do all of the regular kind of camera shots that you'd be used to in the real world. Now, another way that you can move the camera is through the active camera window. There's a series of camera tools available here under the drop down, under the camera icon, that allow you to do all these in a slightly more intuitive way. So the unified camera tool is one. The orbit camera tool is another, and then you can track X, Y and Z. So the unified camera tool kind of allows you to pick up and drag in pretty much any direction. Okay, so this is changing the vertical and horizontal angles just by clicking and dragging on it, and this will get me any kind of an angle that I want on that shot. The other ones limit the type of movement that you can have with the camera. So the orbit camera tool, again, will orbit left and right, or you can orbit up and down. If you hold shift, it will lock it to up, down, left and right. So this is the orbiting shot that I did a moment ago. The last two will track. So these are tracking shots, so you can track up and down or left and right. It looks like I'm moving the object, but if you look at the camera, it's actually the camera that's moving. And then track Z moves it forwards or backwards. You can see on the left hand side, the top view is showing me where this camera is going. Now I can change that. If I click on that and change it to front, for example, and do a track XY. Now if you look at the camera on the left, you'll see that it moves down. Consequently, the shot looks like it's moving up. These are the ways that you can move the camera. Excuse me. Now the cameras themselves can be set up to be active at any point on the timeline. So this is where you're looking at a series of cameras being added so that you can cut from one camera to the next. Now the way that this is going to work is that the active view is going to show whatever camera is topmost in the layers and has some of the clip available under the playhead. This is my wide shot, so I'm going to make it even wider by tracking back along the Z-axis. Now it's an extreme long shot. I'm going to set up another camera. I'm going to call this camera left view, close up. I'm going to go and change the left orthogonal view from front to top. And this time what I'll do is I'll use the left hand orthogonal view to pull the camera off to the left. So I'm going to grab the camera's body. You can see the camera's body is just a little pink box there. Now sometimes it's a little bit tricky. Make sure you don't have one of your axes selected, or it will only pull it in one direction. If you grab the camera's body, you can click and drag it around like that. This should give me a left view. It's a bit extreme, so I'll pull it back around and go in a little bit closer. Now let's say I want to cut from wide to my left view. Well, because left view is the topmost in my layers and the clip spans the entire timeline, it's going to be the only view that is rendered or visible in the active camera. So there's a few things that I can do here. I can trim back that clip so that at this point on the timeline, wide is the topmost clip under the playhead, and then when the playhead gets to this one, left view close-up is going to be the only available clip topmost in the layers. So really it kind of makes sense. Whatever is at the top and that you have a clip there in the timeline, that's going to be the camera that's rendered out. So when I play this, it's going to cut from wide, and when it gets to that clip, it's going to cut. Now the last camera that I'm going to add is going to have movement on it, and I'm going to call it Orbit Cam. So I'll click again, new camera, change the name to Orbit Cam, click OK. Now notice that this is spanning the entire timeline, so this is going to be the only camera visible until I do something about the duration of the clip on the timeline. Now the idea for this camera is that it's going to start off on the right hand side with a right angle, and it's going to orbit all the way so that it's on looking at the left angle, or having a left angle view. I'm going to start the animation here at around 16 seconds. Right, so to do a movement like this, because I'm only moving the camera's body and not its point of interest, it's going to be a position change. So I'll open up the position parameter or property on my Orbit Cam, drop a keyframe there, move the playhead down a bit, and change the position of the camera. And what you'll see is a motion path being laid from the first keyframe to the second keyframe. Now, if I just scrub through this, you'll see a particular distinctive type of movement where it moves in towards the shape and then kind of flips back on itself and shows the reverse angle. This might be what you're looking for. This is actually quite a nice dynamic way of adjusting the camera angle using keyframes. Now let's say on the other hand, what I want to do is I want to do an orbit so that it kind of keeps the JPEG positioned centrally in my composition window and allows me to orbit at an even distance around that JPEG. I won't do anything down here in the timeline. What I need to do is I need to adjust my motion path. Now we changed the settings, or actually we didn't, the other group, when I was in with them, we changed the settings of After Effects so that when you create a motion path, it draws it in a linear way from A to B, a perfectly straight line. Remember that a motion path on anything, including a camera, can either be linear or a straight line, or it can be curved. And the way that you change it from straight line to curved is through the spatial interpolation of that motion path. And spatial interpolation just means how this line is drawn. So if I control click on that, go to keyframe interpolation and change it from linear to Bezier and click OK, you'll see that you now have a control point that you can pull down. I'll do the same for this. And adjust that one as well. Now by creating this curve, when I move through that, it's going to move in an arc. And if you look at the active camera, it renders the orbiting from the same distance, and you can see on the left hand side why that is happening. The camera is now moving around an arc and not in a straight line through the object. Now I have my three cameras. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start it so that the orbit cam only comes in on the start of this movement. Now I could, if I wanted, trim it back using this, just clicking and dragging on the end. There's another way I want to show you how to do this, and it's by splitting the layer at the playhead. So when I have the playhead positioned somewhere in the timeline, if I select any layer and hold down Command, Shift and D, it splits that layer, and then I can delete either the start or the end version of the split layers. So it splits the layer at the timeline, puts the start of the clip before the playhead on one layer and the end of the clip after the playhead on the other layer. So I can delete either this or this. Because I wanted to start here, I'm going to delete this. Now everything starts where it should, so I can pull the playhead through, cut from wide, close up, orbit. 3 camera angles, 1 with animation.